The call came at 4:47 in the morning. Nell Carver knew because she had been awake since 4, sitting at her kitchen table in her apartment on Bloor Street, with a cup of tea gone cold and a stack of documents she had read so many times the corners had started to curl. She had not slept properly in 3 days. That was not unusual for her. What was unusual was that her phone was ringing at all, because almost nobody had that number. She stared at the screen. It said, Patrick Ozzie, senior partner. She picked up, Nell. Patrick's voice was tight in a way she had never heard before, not in 2 years of working at Ozzie & Vance, not through any of the late nights or the lost cases, or the time a client had threatened to sue the firm for malpractice. He always sounded like a man who had walked into a room and immediately figured out all the exits. Right now he sounded like a man who could not find the door. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm listening, she said. Graham is in the hospital. They took him in an hour ago. They're saying, could be serious. Nobody knows yet. He was supposed to be in court in 4 hours. Nell set down her tea. The Whitmore hearing. Yes, the $800 million fraud case. Yes, Nell. She stood up from the table. Her chair scraped against the hardwood. Through her window, Toronto was still dark, the CN Tower blinking slowly in the distance like it was thinking something over. Patrick, I am a junior associate. I have been a junior associate for 22 months. Graham has been preparing that case for 11 months, and I have been helping him prepare it, which is not the same thing as being prepared to argue it. I know what you are, Patrick said. I also know what you've been doing for the past 3 days. I know you've read every document in that file. I know you've flagged 17 inconsistencies that Graham hadn't caught. I know because he called me about them on Tuesday and complained about you in a way that told me he was impressed. Nell said nothing. There is nobody else, Patrick said. Every partner we have is either in a courtroom or on a plane. I have called all of them. You are the only person who knows this case well enough to walk in there and not embarrass us. She looked down at the stack of documents on her table, the ones she had been reading for 3 days, the ones that had kept her up until 4 in the morning because something about them felt wrong in a way she hadn't been able to name yet. The client, she said. Does he know? He will know when you walk in. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. I'll be there. The client's name was Rowan Voss. She knew who he was before she ever set foot in Ozzie & Vance. Everyone in Toronto knew who Rowan Voss was in the way that you knew the weather, not because you sought out the information but because it was simply in the air. He was 38 years old. He had built Voss Capital from a single office above a dry cleaner on King Street into one of the most profitable private equity firms in the country. The kind of firm that bought struggling companies, turned them around, and sold them for 3 times what they were worth. He had been on the cover of Report on Business 4 times. He had a reputation for being exact, demanding, and not particularly kind about either quality. He was also, according to the fraud charges currently pending against him, someone who had systematically falsified financial disclosures to investors over a period of 3 years, concealing losses of nearly $200 million while continuing to raise funds. The prosecution was seeking $800 million in damages plus criminal referral. Rowan Voss said he had not done it. Nell had read enough of the file to believe he was telling the truth. She had also read enough to understand why the prosecution believed he had. She arrived at the courthouse on University Avenue at 7:15, 45 minutes before proceedings were scheduled to begin, wearing the one suit she owned that did not look like she had bought it from a clearance rack, which she had. She had her briefcase, her laptop, a legal pad, and a flash drive that had been sitting in the bottom of her bag since Tuesday, when she had found it tucked into the back of a document folder that Graham had handed her without comment. She had tried to open it twice at home. Both times it had asked for a password she didn't have. She had meant to ask Graham about it. Then Graham had gone to the hospital. Rowan Voss was already in the consultation room when she got there. He was standing at the window with his back to her, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking out at the street below with the particular stillness of someone who had spent a long time learning not to show what they were feeling. He was taller than she had expected. She did not know why she had expected anything at all. He turned when she opened the door. His eyes went to her, then past her, then back to her. He had gray eyes, and they were doing rapid and unflattering arithmetic. "You're not Graham," he said. "No," Nell said. "I'm not. I'm Nell Carver. I'm a junior associate at O.C. & Vance, and I've been working on your case for the past 7 months. Graham Lester had a cardiac episode last night and is currently in hospital. I am the person who is going to be representing you this morning." She said it the way she had rehearsed it in the cab on the way over, plainly, without apology, without the slight upward inflection at the end that would have made it sound like a question. She had learned early that the moment you made your own introduction sound like a question, you had already lost. Rowan Voss stared at her. "A junior associate," he said. "Yes. You've been a lawyer for how long?" 22 months. The silence that followed was not comfortable. He turned back to the window. "Get Patrick on the phone. Patrick is the one who sent me. Then get someone else." "There isn't anyone else. Every partner at the firm is either in court or in the air. I understand this is not the situation you wanted to be in. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not the situation I wanted either. But I have read every document in this file. I know the charges, I know the evidence, and I know there are things in this case that the prosecution is counting on nobody noticing." She set her briefcase on the table. "We have 35 minutes before we need to be in that courtroom. I'd like to use them." He turned around again. Whatever he was looking for, she didn't know. She held his gaze because she had nothing to hide and nowhere else to look. "Talk," he said. His real name, she had learned from the file, was Kwame Rowan Voss. Kwame from his Ghanaian father, who had come to Calgary in 1981 with $30 and a degree in electrical engineering, and Voss from his mother's Dutch-Canadian family who had not been particularly pleased about the marriage. He went by Rowan because it was easier. He had built his company the same way his father had built his life, by understanding exactly what something was worth and not paying more than that, and not accepting less. What the prosecution had was a set of financial statements, a former CFO named Gerald Whitmore who had agreed to testify against him, and a narrative that Rowan Voss had directed the falsification of those statements to hide the underperformance of 3 funds, thereby defrauding investors of nearly $200 million while continuing to solicit new investment. What the prosecution did not have, what they were hoping nobody would notice, was that Gerald Whitmore had his own reasons for the story he was telling. Nell had found it on a Wednesday evening, working late, going through subsidiary records that had been produced in discovery and mostly ignored because they were dense and poorly organized, and nobody except Nell had apparently found them interesting. Whitmore had quietly incorporated a numbered company in Alberta 18 months before the alleged fraud began. That company had received, in 3 separate transfers, a total of $340,000 from a holding entity connected to the lead plaintiff in the civil suit, the same lead plaintiff whose legal team had apparently introduced Whitmore to the prosecution. She had flagged it for Graham. Graham had called it interesting and told her to keep digging. She had kept digging. And then Graham had ended up in hospital. She laid it out for Rowan in the consultation room in the 28 minutes they had before they had to leave. He listened without interrupting, which she had not expected. He had the quality, she noticed, of someone who had learned that listening was more efficient than talking, even if it hadn't come naturally. "You found this yourself," he said when she finished. "Yes." Graham didn't know about the numbered company? "I flagged it to him Tuesday. I don't know what he did with it after that. And Whitmore gets on the stand today. He's their first witness." "Yes." Something moved behind his gray eyes. Not gratitude, exactly. Something more like recalibration. "What else do you need to know?" he said. They walked into the courtroom with 4 minutes to spare. The prosecuting counsel's name was Theodore Crane, and he was the kind of lawyer who wore his confidence the way some people wore expensive cologne, whether or not the occasion called for it. He was 52, silver-haired, and had spent 20 years as a Crown attorney before going into private practice on behalf of institutional investors. He had a success rate that got mentioned in articles about him the way batting averages got mentioned in sports pieces. He looked at Nell when she walked in, and he did not bother to hide what he thought. "Interesting," he said, to nobody in particular. Nell set her things down at the defense table and did not look at him. The judge was the Honorable Margaret Finch, a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the expression of someone who had heard every possible argument and been persuaded by fewer of them than people expected. She looked at Nell when court was called to order. "I understand Mr. Lester has had a medical emergency," she said. Yes, Your Honor. Nell Carver, junior associate at O.C. & Vance, appearing for the defendant, Rowan Voss. From the gallery, she heard a low murmur. She did not turn around. Mr. Voss, the judge said, are you comfortable proceeding with Miss Carver as your counsel? Rowan, beside her, said, Yes, Your Honor, in a voice that did not contain a single syllable of doubt. Nell did not look at him either, but she felt it, the small, precise gift of it. Crane was on his feet before the judge finished acknowledging the response. Your Honor, given the complexity of these proceedings and the stakes involved, perhaps a short adjournment would be appropriate to allow the defense to arrange more. Experienced. Representation. Mr. Crane, Judge Finch said. Are you suggesting that I should be concerned about the competence of opposing counsel? I'm suggesting that the interests of justice. The interests of justice are mine to weigh. Thank you. We'll proceed. She looked at Nell over the top of her glasses. Miss Carver, you may continue. Crane sat down. Nell could feel him recalibrating, the way a chess player recalibrates when the board doesn't look the way they expected. She had been counting on him to underestimate her. That was, she had decided in the cab this morning, her only real advantage, and she intended to use it until it was gone. Gerald Whitmore was a slight man with a neatly trimmed beard and the manner of someone who had spent a great deal of time being the smartest person in most rooms, and had developed a corresponding habit of explaining things slowly. He took the stand and answered Crane's questions with the practiced ease of someone who had been prepared well and knew exactly what story he was there to tell. The story was, Rowan Voss had called him into his office in the spring of 3 years ago and told him, plainly and without apparent concern, that the fund numbers needed to look better than they were because they had a major capital raise coming and the actual numbers would kill it. Whitmore had objected. Rowan had told him that was not a request. Whitmore had done what he was told because he was afraid. It was a good story. It was simple and it was human, and it put Rowan in the frame of a man who used his power without apology and expected other people to absorb the consequences. Nell watched the jurors while Crane took Whitmore through it, and she saw the particular quality of attention that meant something was landing. Then it was her turn. She stood up, and she took a breath that she did not let anyone see, and she walked to the center of the room. Mr. Whitmore, she said, you testified that you incorporated a numbered company in Alberta approximately 4 years ago. Is that correct? Whitmore blinked. Yes, I believe so. You believe so. Let me help you with the date. 479-2301, Alberta. Limited was incorporated on March 14th, 4 years ago. Does that refresh your memory? I have various business interests. Yes or no, Mr. Whitmore? Did you incorporate that company? A pause. Yes. And between March of that year and the following October, that company received 3 wire transfers totaling $340,000 from a numbered holding entity registered in British Columbia. Are you aware of that? Crane was on his feet. Relevance. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. Your Honor, Nell said. The relevance will become clear within the next 2 minutes. I ask for the court's patience. Judge Finch looked at her for a moment. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Whitmore. Are you aware of those transfers? Another pause. Longer this time. I received some consulting fees during that period. Yes, consulting fees. From a BC holding company whose registered beneficial owner is Douglas Fenwick, who is also, as it happens, the principal backer of the lead plaintiff in the civil action against Mr. Voss. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'm moving to introduce Defense Exhibit F, which is the corporate registry documentation establishing these connections, and Defense Exhibit G, which is the wire transfer records. She had prepared those exhibits at her kitchen table at 3 in the morning, when she still thought Graham was going to be the one using them. She handed them to the clerk. Crane was back up. Your Honor, this is a clear attempt to impugn a witness's credibility through innuendo. It's cross-examination, Nell said. That's what cross-examination is for, Ms. Carver. Judge Finch's voice was level, one at a time. Apologies, Your Honor. The judge studied the documents the clerk had handed her. Then she looked at Whitmore. Something in her expression had shifted. Mr. Whitmore, Nell continued, I want to ask you a straightforward question, and I want you to understand that the documents I've just introduced are going to make the answer fairly apparent regardless. The $340,000 you received from the holding company connected to Douglas Fenwick, was any portion of that payment contingent on your cooperation with the prosecution in this matter? Whitmore's face had gone the particular color of someone who had prepared for a number of scenarios and had not prepared for this one. "I want to speak to my lawyer," he said. The courtroom went very quiet. What happened next took most of the afternoon and involved a brief recess, a hushed and intense conversation between Crane and someone who appeared to be his associate, and Judge Finch issuing a series of instructions in a tone that made the air in the courtroom feel pressurized. Nell sat at the defense table through most of it and drank water from a plastic cup and went over her notes. She did not look at Rowan. She knew he was watching her, and she did not want to see the expression on his face because she was not yet sure what it meant and she needed to concentrate. During the recess, she took out the flash drive. She had been turning it over in her fingers under the table for the past 2 hours. An old habit from childhood. She was the kind of person who needed something in her hands when she was thinking. It occurred to her that the password might be something obvious. She tried the case number. She tried Graham's name. She tried Whitmore, which seemed too on the nose and was. Then she tried 4792301, the numbered company. The drive opened. She sat very still for exactly 4 seconds. Then she plugged it into her laptop under the table. There were 6 files. They were internal audit documents from Voss Capital, time-stamped from the same period the alleged fraud had occurred. They showed, in precise and unambiguous detail, that the financial statements had in fact been accurate, and that 3 separate sets of figures had been altered after submission, without Rowan's authorization, by someone with access to the firm's accounting systems, whose login credentials matched those assigned to Gerald Whitmore. Graham had found this. He had found it and he had put it on a drive without telling her what it was, tucked into a folder, left in her hands in case he needed someone to carry it forward. She did not know if he had planned that, or if it was instinct or coincidence. She did not have time to think about it. She raised her hand and asked to approach the bench. She did not cry in court. She had promised herself that years ago, when she was 19 and sitting in a different kind of courtroom in a much smaller building in Sudbury, watching a judge explain to her mother why the appeal had been denied and what would happen next. She had cried then, in the hallway after, with her back against a wall that smelled like industrial cleaner. She had decided somewhere in those 10 minutes that she would spend the rest of her life understanding how rooms like that one worked and what it took to turn them. She did not cry now. She presented the drive to Judge Finch. She explained what it contained and how she had come to have it, and that she believed it to be material to the proceedings. She watched Crane look at the summary documents and watched something go out of his face the way a light goes out. Not violently, just suddenly gone. The judge called another recess, then a longer one. Then, at 20 to 5, she reconvened the court and said, in the measured language of someone who had been doing this for 25 years, that in light of significant new evidentiary disclosures and the concerns raised during cross-examination of the prosecution's primary witness, she was suspending proceedings pending a review of the material in question, and that she had significant concerns about the integrity of the case as presented. Gerald Whitmore did not go home that evening. His own lawyer appeared, then a second lawyer. Theodore Crane looked, for the first time, like a man who was doing arithmetic and not getting a number he liked. Rowan said nothing during any of this. He sat beside Nell with his hands flat on the table and his eyes forward, and when Judge Finch rose and the clerk called all rise and the gallery shuffled to its feet, he stood with everyone else and waited. Afterwards, in the corridor outside. The same kind of corridor she had stood in when she was 19. The same industrial smell she recognized without wanting to. Rowan Voss stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at her. "How long have you had that drive?" he said. "Since Tuesday. I didn't know what was on it. Graham gave it to you." "Yes. Did he tell you to open it in court?" "He didn't tell me anything. He handed me a folder with a drive tucked in the back and then he had a heart attack." She looked at him. "I'm sorry. That came out." "No," he said. "Don't apologize for being direct. I've spent 11 months paying for polished and look where it got me." He looked down the corridor, then back at her. Something had changed in his face since the morning. Not softened, exactly, but rearranged into something she hadn't seen in any of the photographs or the articles or the file. Something quieter. "You found Whitmore's company yourself. The payments." "Yes." "When?" "Wednesday. I flagged it to Graham. He said it was interesting." "Of course he did." He exhaled. "Of course he did. And then he handed you everything else and ended up in the hospital and left you to walk into that courtroom this morning with 35 minutes notice against Theodore Crane. He shook his head once, and she could not tell if it was admiration or frustration or some private mix of both. How did you know the password? The numbered company's registration number. I tried it on an instinct. I had been going over the numbers for 3 days. It stayed in my head. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the November light was falling fast the way it does in Toronto, the day just collapsing without warning into evening. Through the tall windows at the end of the corridor, she could see the streetlights coming on. Patrick is going to make you a partner, he said. If he doesn't, I'll tell him to. Nell blinked. I don't think that's how it works. I have been a client of that firm for 6 years and I have referred them approximately $12 million in business. I'm told that is how it works. She almost laughed. It surprised her. She had not expected to laugh today. I think Patrick will want to make his own decision about that. Fine, I'll ask him to let the work speak for itself. Which it will. He paused. Can I take you for dinner? To say thank you. Properly. She considered this. She was aware that she was exhausted in a way that had gone so deep it had come back around to something resembling clarity. She was aware that her one good suit had a small ink stain on the cuff, that she had been successfully keeping hidden from everyone all day and was now done hiding. She was aware that she had approximately 37 missed calls, and that Patrick was among the callers, and that Graham was, according to a text from his assistant, stable and asking questions, and apparently arguing with the nurses, which sounded right. She was also aware that Rowan Voss had spent the entire day watching her in the manner of someone doing significant interior revision, and that she found this more interesting than she would have predicted. I need to make some calls first, she said, and I need to change. I have ink on my cuff. He looked at the cuff, then back at her. I didn't notice, I know, I hid it well. He almost smiled. It was a different thing than she had expected, a smile on his face, less guarded than the rest of him, like a window left open in a very orderly room. Take the calls, he said. Change. I'll be here. You don't have to wait. I know I don't have to. He said it simply, like it was obvious, like it was a fact about himself that he had just discovered and found he didn't mind. She called Patrick first, standing outside the courthouse on University Avenue with the November wind coming off the lake and doing its best work. He answered on the first ring. You brilliant, terrifying person, he said. Graham had the evidence, she said. I just figured out where he put it. Graham had 17 months on this case and he didn't find the numbered company. He might have. I don't know what he knew. Nell? Patrick? A pause. How are you? She looked up at the building. The lights inside were still on. Through the glass she could see Rowan, still in the corridor, looking at his phone. I'm fine, she said. I'm going to go eat something. We should talk tomorrow. Yes, Patrick said. We should talk tomorrow. She hung up. She stood on the steps for a moment in the cold. Above the city, the sky had gone the specific dark blue that Toronto turns in November just before it goes black, the color of something settling, the color of a long day releasing its grip. She thought about her mother. She did so quickly and without indulging it, the way she had learned to think about the things that had made her. The courtroom in Sudbury, the hallway, the smell of industrial cleaner and the peculiar silence of a room where a decision has just been made that will rearrange everything. The 9 years since then, during which she had worked jobs that required her to be on her feet for 8 hours and then come home and read cases until midnight, because there was not another way and she had not been willing to look for one. She had walked into a courtroom this morning against a 52-year-old decorated counsel with a 20-year track record, with 35 minutes notice and a suit she'd bought on clearance and a flash drive she didn't know the password to. She had not won yet. The case was suspended, not decided, and there was a great deal still to come. She was not someone who believed in counting things before they were counted. But something had happened today that she had needed to happen, in a room that mattered, in front of people who had not believed she could. She went back inside to find Rowan. They went to a restaurant on King Street, the kind of place that was quiet on a weekday evening and had good bread and did not rush you. Rowan Voss was, she discovered over the course of 2 hours, considerably different when he was not managing a catastrophe. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers, which she had noticed was rarer than it should be. He told her, without being asked, about the dry cleaner on King Street where his first office had been, about his father calling from Calgary when the firm hit its first million and saying simply good, "Now be careful." He asked about Sudbury, because she had mentioned it once and he had filed it, and she told him enough and then looked at him and said, "That's what it made me." And he looked back at her and said, "I know. You know," she repeated. "I figured it out somewhere around hour 2 today," he said. When Crane made that comment about experience, and you looked at him like you had been waiting for him to say exactly that. "I wasn't waiting for it specifically. No, but you've been waiting for a room like that one your whole life." He poured more water into her glass, an unexpectedly domestic gesture. "And you were ready." She looked at her glass. "It's not decided yet. It will be. Whitmore's going to fall apart when his own lawyer gets to him. The audit documents are conclusive. Crane knows it." He paused. "You should know, the offer I made about Patrick, I meant it. But I also want to say that it's separate from this." He gestured between them, at the table, at the fact of them being there. "From whatever this is." "What is it?" she said. He considered. "I'm not sure yet. I think I'd like to find out." He looked up at her. "If you're interested in that kind of research." She thought about saying something careful. She had spent most of her life saying careful things, measuring the gap between where she was and where she needed to be, not reaching until she was certain she could hold on. It was a useful quality in a lawyer. It was a less useful quality at a table on King Street with a man who was watching her the way she would have had to work very hard not to watch back. "I think I might be," she said. Outside, it had started to snow. The first snow of the season, the kind Toronto gets in November that doesn't stick but falls seriously anyway, like it means to establish something. Through the restaurant window she could see it coming down in the lamplight, unhurried, covering the street in a thin and temporary white. Rowan Voss had a company to rebuild, and a case not quite finished. Nell Carver had 37 missed calls, and a suit she needed to take to the dry cleaner and approximately 11 months of case files to go back through now that she understood, finally, what she was actually looking for. But the bread was warm, and the snow was falling, and for the first time in 3 days, she was not thinking about the documents on her kitchen table. That felt, she thought, like enough to start with.